Welcome to the Homeschool with Moxie podcast, where our goal is to inspire and encourage you with actionable strategies to take you from overwhelmed to confident in your homeschool adventure. I'm your host, Abby Banks, and this is episode 296. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Notebooking Pages. If you want a great tool for simplifying your homeschool, for using living books or any books you want, for teaching multiple ages together, for basically keeping your sanity while still educating the kids, then you're going to love notebooking. And the best thing about Notebooking Pages is that you can download hundreds, I would say even thousands of free notebooking pages to give it a try. Also, if you sign up for their free pages, Deborah will send you a free quick start guide that explains what notebooking is. So check them out using our link, which is 4onemore.com/notebooking, or I will put the link below. Welcome to episode 296. Of course, the show notes are at 4onemore.com/296. So are you struggling to get everything done in your homeschool day? This episode of the podcast is going to be really helpful for you because we have homeschool mom and podcaster Leigh Nguyen here to share essential homeschool planning tips to help you organize your day for maximum productivity. So join us in this episode to learn how to create a homeschool routine that works for your family and get practical advice on how to make it flexible. The most important times of the day that you need to take care of right now. You will love these actionable tips. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Leigh Nguyen is the homeschool mom of 3, which includes 2 graduates. She's the founder of Little by Little Homeschool, which seeks to encourage families to create and embrace the homeschool lifestyle that's best for them. Her 13-year homeschool education journey has been very diverse, and she uses this to uniquely inspire homeschool moms to begin and stay the course. So you'll want to check out Leigh's podcast as well and her site at Little by Little Homeschool. So enjoy this conversation. Let's talk all about setting your day up for success and how to plan for homeschooling to get everything done that you want to get done in a day. It really is possible, but some of these tips might surprise you. So enjoy this conversation with Leigh. Hello, Leigh, and welcome to the Homeschool with Moxie podcast.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here, Abby, and to connect and communicate with you. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, that's awesome. So start out by introducing yourself. Tell us kind of how long have you been homeschooling and maybe why did you start?
I have been homeschooling. Well, I guess we are now in our 14th year. Or actually, I say I'm in my 14th year because I've graduated some kids. And so I have 3 children. 2 of them have now graduated. I have a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old who are done with homeschool. And I am homeschooling just solo here with just one kiddo. Who's 16. So I mean, a young man as well. So that's been the past 2 years, just homeschooling him. We started off, my kids went to public school. My 2 oldest went through 2nd grade and kindergarten. And so we didn't plan on homeschooling, and really felt like during that school year that I had a 2nd grader and a kindergartner that God really calling us to make a switch. And I didn't know anybody. I had an aunt who homeschooled, and I knew of one friend, and I just didn't talk to her about it. The only thing I ever said to her was like, oh, I could never homeschool. And then when I felt like we needed a shift in our family, needed to do something different, and made that switch. So the year we started homeschooling, I would have then had a 3rd grader, 1st grader, and a preschooler. And so from the beginning, I was like, if we're doing this, we're doing this, and we're going to do it all the way through. And so, yeah, I'm getting close to the end of we'll say my career.
We're kind of at the similar stage ages of kids. I've graduated 3 and my oldest is going to be 22 in the new year. So like similar-ish, right? So I get it. It is weird when you've been homeschooling for so long to think, oh, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know if I'm happy about it, sad, it's bittersweet. It's very weird right? When you have all the little ones, and this is maybe encouragement for the moms with all the little kids, and you think, this is my life forevermore. I will never get another full night's sleep or whatever. My house will always be a mess. And it's like, it really, the seasons change so quickly, don't they?
I completely agree. And I'm right there with you. It's bittersweet. And God has been giving me different things to do to fill up kind of that time because he's mostly independent. We still do what I call morning time. We still do stuff together because I think it's important for our relationship. And I enjoy the learning and growing I'm doing. But yeah, it is bittersweet. It's great to have the kids that are launched and to see the success. And yes, when you're in the middle of it, you're like, I can't get out of the house without it taking like an hour even just to leave the house. And the house is always a mess. There's always something to do to clean up. Then you think this is always going to be like this, but it's not. It happens, and suddenly you're at the other end, like you and I are at.
Hmm. Today's topic is one of my favorites because I love talking about like how do you set up your day? How do we plan? Like I just think that's so important too because it sets us up for success. When this episode airs, it's going to be after Christmas, so it's the perfect time for that hard break, after the holidays, moms are reevaluating and going, "Okay, I need to change some things. Things aren't working." So I think it's a great time of year for this topic too. So let's start by just talk about the number one thing moms need to focus on when they're planning out their day.
My answer is not going to be what maybe people are expecting because I know most of the time I'll hear from moms, well, tell me exactly what to do every minute of every single day. And I was the same way too. So my answer is the number one thing you need to focus on is your expectations and to really think, what is really possible in this day? I assume a lot of homeschool moms are like me, and I have a long to-do list, mostly in my mind, of things that obviously need to get done, but then there's a lot of things that I want to get done. So really to think what is actually possible. And like you and I were talking about, there's different seasons. And when you have little kids at home, you might not have time for some of the things that you had time before. But you'll get to the season that I'm sure you're experiencing now where we actually have some time. We can maybe catch up on some things around the house. We can go out to coffee, maybe with a friend on a random Wednesday at 11 a.m. because we have all teens at home or me one teen and I'll kind of schedule my day around that. So really just thinking like what are my expectations? And I think this is where we can really wash ourselves in God's word and just how is he telling us to be and to focus on that, focusing on our heart, focusing on because when our expectations are too high, we become impatient and we can blow our top way too easily. And we take it out on those that we don't necessarily want to. We take it out on our husband, we take it out on our kids. And so thinking also like what really can be done. And that varies in the different ages that your kids are at. When I had just small kids at home, homeschooling them, my expectations, I really had to lower them for what actually could be done. And I would say that when we tend to put ourselves at the bottom of the list, right? And we can accomplish more if, as mom, we are well rested, which, as you're saying, we don't always get all our a great night of sleep. We're interrupted with our sleep, but we do what we can, right? And when we're well nourished. And so when we can, when our body is not tired and our mind is not tired and our body and mind is fed with food and rest, then we can actually accomplish the things that we need to accomplish. But then the tactical, you're like, okay, give me some tactical kind of stuff. And I have found that having a routine, having a schedule of like a specific time to a specific time, like the school does not typically work. It could work for some families. I remember within the first maybe week or two of homeschooling, I was like, okay, this isn't working. We were just kind of like, it was much more fluid. I was like, we need a schedule. And so I came up with this schedule, and my husband went off to work and he was like, all right, well, good luck on that. Let me know how it goes. He comes home and he's like, how was that? I was like, I threw it out after an hour because he wasn't done. We weren't done with the math lesson, and nobody was upset about not being done with the math lesson. Am I supposed to just stop? And so it was a retraining of my mind too, of what can the day look like and how it can look different than school. So having a routine, I have just found that having the morning routine, having a time for your homeschool, having an afternoon routine, which then varies also from like the dinner rush and the making of the dinner, the eating of the dinner, and then the evening routine and getting kids to bed and baths. I have found that over the years, it was best to consider for my family when our brains were the most fresh. And so getting everything done, and I know that homeschooling is a priority for moms that are listening. It's a priority for most of us that are homeschooling, and we're like, well, when are we going to get that done? And I remember saying that has to be important. That is my, in air quotes, we'll say job. That's my job right now, is to focus on this home education, whether that was the curriculum or letting them have time to explore stuff or go on field trips or documentaries or whatever that included. I found that when our brains were fresh was when we were most receptive. So I was always a stickler about having homeschool first thing in the morning. And we weren't necessarily night owls. So that kind of just worked well for me. So focusing on like when I want to get things done, when do I need my brain for some things? And homeschool, I really needed my brain. My kids really needed their brains too. So doing that fresh in the morning and then in the afternoon was much easier for me to be able to get chores done and to maybe run some errands and to get some things done during that time because I could just do it. My body could just go on autopilot and mop the floor and not necessarily need a lot of brain space for that.
Mhm. I think you're right. So how do you make plans then? What is your specific, like, I don't know, what is your go-to? What do you do when you're trying to say, okay, I need the housework done. I need to be the chauffeur. I have this how, then do need to homeschool too, like all these things. Cause I think this is what overwhelms homeschool moms. We have so many hats and it's like, how do I plan it all in? So can you share with us how you make those plans?
Couple of things. The days can look very different, whereas we're used to oftentimes like school. What kids go to school Monday to Friday, and the days basically look the same. They might have some different classes on different days, but when it comes to homeschool, it can look very different. You could have a co-op on, say, a Wednesday morning. Well, Wednesday morning is going to look, and all of Wednesday is going to look very different than Tuesday. And so it's looking at each day and what is a routine that I can put into place for that day. We often think that every single day has to look exactly the same. I have some friends who homeschool 4 days a week, and 4 days a week look kind of the same, but they might look a little bit different. And then Friday is more of a free for all, or it's to get errands done, or it's to go on a field trip. So, really, just looking at individual days. When it came to homeschool, I found the best way to plan. I'm an organized person, but not like crazy super organized. So to me, thinking of planning out my homeschool year, the entire year, say in like August or July or August, was too much
Mhm.
because there's too many factors, right? We've got kids, whether you have one child or 10 children.
Mhm.
That's they're, you never know what's going to happen, right? And so for planning out the entire year was way too much. So I found that it was good to have an idea of curriculum and resources and books that we wanted to read. And sometimes I just had to let things see where things fell, how it kind of just landed. But I would spend on Sunday afternoon. This is when I had all three of my kids and they were all young. And I still do this actually now, just with one kid. And on Sunday afternoon, I would take some time. It took a little bit longer when I had all three kids and a lot of different curriculums than it does right now. But I would sit down and take a look at that week and say, what do we have going on this week? So say you have a dentist appointment on Thursday morning. Well, your regular homeschool day might not really happen. Maybe you want them to do some independent reading and you want them to do a math lesson. That might be all you have time for. But when we go week by week, we can kind of have an idea as to how the I guess what is the phrase, like the chips are gonna fall? Is that a phrase? Is that the right phrase?
Yep.
And so we kind of have an idea as to what's going to happen. We Now, granted, someone can get sick. There could be, I don't know, an injury. There could be something, something that comes up. But on Sundays, I would sit down and come up with a plan for that week and write out in my kids' assignment books. It was just a simple notebook, just a notebook that I would purchase from like Target or Walmart for 50 cents at the beginning of the homeschool year when they have like those big sales and stuff. And I would just write down the day, write down the subjects, and when they were all younger, there were some subjects they could do independently. And then there were some subjects that they needed mom for. And I found that if I highlighted, I would just get like a yellow or an orange highlighter and highlight the subjects that they could just do independently on their own. They could sit down and just start working on those on their own. And then they knew that they would need me for certain lessons. And so that really helped with getting all of the homeschool stuff done. So it's just to plan it out every single week but having a broad idea. Now, I live in New York, so we do have regulations and we have quarterly reports to submit. And so I would look at a calendar and kind of figure out the couple of months that would fit into each quarter so that I would know what am I submitting and when am I submitting that and making sure I get all my paperwork in so that I avoid any issues with the school district and with the state. So but that kind of is what has worked all the way through 14 years. I kind of struggled in the beginning and then came up with that system, and it's worked for elementary age. It's worked for middle school. It's worked for high school. So that's how I kind of have worked with the homeschool. And then it comes to things like, well, the housework and all that stuff. So again, having that routine for me again in my family, it was best for us to have a start time ish, which sounds kind of strict, but it worked for us. It worked for me to say, hey, 8:30, you're in the living room.
Mhm.
And I want your bed made, I want your teeth brushed, and I want you dressed. Maybe you just put on clean pajamas or another pair of sweatpants. I don't really care. But having that time that we would stay focused. And there were some years where I was doing other kind of side stuff. I had a blog for a while. And so I needed time to be able to do that as well. And so I was like, you've got me in the morning. This is when we'll do our morning time together. I'll do my lessons with you. I'll do any corrections and that kind of stuff. And then if they were dilly-dallying, if they were fooling around and didn't get done in the morning, then
Mhm.
they would have to go after lunch and get a couple of things done. But then the afternoon was a time for running errands. It was a time maybe for things like dentist appointments or times to get a lot of chores done, to get a lot of work around the house and stuff. And I spent a lot of time cooking, a lot of time in the kitchen. So just kind of getting meals prepped and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how housework has sort of landed. But then we also have the kids getting everybody everywhere. And for my family, it just felt right for us not to get involved in too many things. And all the kids, if there was something that all of them could go to at the same time, that was perfect. My
Mhm.
husband worked some shifts that were either an overnight or just an odd, and there was a lot of seasons that it was just me. And so I can only be in one place at one time, and I didn't have family to help me out. So it was out of necessity for me to say, well, we can only do one thing at a time or one night a week that kids are out. And so church activities were great because they could be of all ages, right? My kids did some things like my daughter did American Heritage Girls, and then at the same time was like a trail life for the boys. And then there's a regular church thing. And if we did sports, they typically, it would somehow kind of land where it wasn't always at the same time, or it was, and the fields were all right there. So it didn't really matter. But just kind of really looking at like what is actually feasible and not to overbook my family.
Yeah, that's good advice because I think a lot of parents they feel that pressure of like we have to do everything that's available and you don't have to do it all, right? And when I hear you talk, it kind of sounds like time blocking but not strict. Like you're not strictly time blocking, but you're more thinking like flexible, like morning chunk, afternoon chunk. It's kind of like that, isn't it? And I mean, I find that very helpful too. So that brings us to this question. It kind of goes along with that because you're talking about like your times of day. Well, you mentioned that there are two times in a day that will make or break the day. So tell us about what is that and how can we make sure we're not like wasting that time or doing it wrong or whatever.
Yeah. So the two times a day that I feel like make or break the day is maybe going to sound a little odd at first, but just stay with me here. Would be the morning, first thing in the morning and in the evening. But I say actually the evening is more important because what we do in the evening before bed really sets us up for success the next day or not. If we wake up the next morning and there are still dishes in the sink, there is still a mess here, there's still a mess there are things that are not taken care of, then we start off the next day behind. Now, I know there are times where I've been utterly exhausted and just went to bed, or there are times I wasn't feeling well or something and didn't get those things done. And I always felt it the next day. And my husband is completely on board with this because there were times where we would have host people or have maybe Bible study. And you're like, I'm so tired. I don't want to clean up. He's like, no, 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 we are cleaning up because we are not going to deal with this tomorrow morning. And, he's like, we'll just push through and we'll do it. So he's been a huge help for that. But just on regular nights, there's just so many nights for my family that we've just been home. And it's so easy to get caught up and spend my time on something else. For example, phones and social media. We can get so wrapped up, and all of a sudden you can be scrolling through something and then 30 minutes has gone by. And so I have found that being just having some self control and being just disciplined in the evening to get some things done. So you're like, well, what am I supposed to do in the evening? Would come up with a list and I don't even need to consult my list anymore because I know exactly what I need to do every single evening. Well, part of that is cleaning up the kitchen, getting the dishwasher set. I have a timer, which I didn't know when I first got the dishwasher. I was like, oh, I have a timer. I can have it set and it can turn on in a couple of hours so that it's running while we're asleep and wake up in the morning and I've got fresh clean dishes and getting the counters cleaned and taking a look at what am I making for breakfast the next day or even taking a look at and saying, well, what's for dinner tomorrow night? Do I have the chicken out of the freezer and is it thawing? There's been many nights that I've been like, oh, I didn't. And
Yeah.
so I run to the freezer and get that pulled out and then being so thankful the next day that I did. Not that you can't thaw things quickly. I know you can, but still, it's that extra, maybe 12 hours that it has to thaw. And so looking at the evening, like what is going to set you up for success the next day? There's even been some seasons where I would set out whatever I could for breakfast. And so that the next day it was out and ready, whatever dishes, whatever pans, or if I'm going to make eggs, just take the frying pan, put it out on top of the stovetop, changing things out like kitchen towels that are wet and dirty and just just changing whatever out, but also getting homeschool set up. Like I mentioned earlier, I would set up on Sunday what needed to be done. So each night before I go to bed. And I still do this now, even for my 16-year-old, and he wouldn't even notice. It doesn't matter. It's just become such a routine to me that I just go and do it. I go over and take a look at his stack of stuff. And especially when they were younger, there was maybe different subjects we would do on different days. So we didn't need certain books. And I didn't want them to come down and see like a huge stack of books and being overwhelmed because that would often start with like a defeated mindset for them. So then I would flip over their assignment notebook to the following day and take a look like what is this child doing? What is this child doing? Just so that I in my mind had an idea of what they were going to be doing the next day so that I was prepared. So that's the evening. It's just kind of, I mean, even simple things like locking up the door, taking the dog out one more time, and just all those things, turning off all the lights, and something silly like, we turn the Wi-Fi off at night, just whatever. Write it down, the things that you want to get done, and you'll find that it does become a routine. And I rarely forget something on that list. So the second thing is then in the morning. And if you have done the things the night before, your morning is so much more smooth. Now, there were seasons where I barely could get up before my kids would get up. Now that they're all older, I can easily get up an hour beforehand and get the dishwasher emptied. And there were seasons where I would, again, just get up when they would, and they would help me empty the dishwasher. We just kind of had a routine of what would happen and when was breakfast. And I'd already thought about it the night before. So it's not like, oh, what am I going to make? And I was like, no, you're going to make some scrambled eggs and have some bacon and some toast or make some oatmeal, whatever it was going to be. And I already had that in mind. So having also then just a list in the morning. What things do you want to accomplish? And this morning doesn't have to be like hours long. It could be what do I want to do in the first half an hour of the time that I get up. And also included that is time set aside for just having some personal morning devotions and reading the Bible has always been important to me. So would set aside time for that as well. So those are the two times, the morning and the evening. But I always say that if you are feeling overwhelmed by the idea of both of those, just start with the evening. Start with what you're going to do the night before. And my evening routine typically starts like an hour before I go to bed. And so that kind of gives me time then to wind down and after I get everything done. And so I kind of have right now a set time, like, okay, by 9 o'clock, you need to be shutting things down. You can need to be kind of getting done, making sure that everything is done. And then you can sit in bed and read for a while and, relax and get to bed on time.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good advice. So like, do you have any strategies for moms who are feeling overwhelmed by the never-ending list of things they have to get done every homeschool day? I get your like plan the night before and the assignment notebooks. Is there any other strategies or things that for moms that are kind of feeling burnt out by the drudgery of like this homeschool thing, right? Like every day, oh, I got to homeschool the kids again today. And like, there are just some seasons too that are harder, I think, mentally and just getting through it. But do you have any tips or strategies for, avoiding burnout?
I think when we have too much curriculum, too many resources, and our to-do list of things because there's so many great things. I know even now there's so much more opportunities and curriculum and things out there than my kids had. Like the internet was still like barely dial up at that point when I started homeschooling. So there wasn't a lot of resources. Now there's just so many. So it's so hard. And when we feel like we have to do this science with the first grader and this science with the third grader and this science with a fifth grader. Like, no, no, no. Do them all together.
Mhm.
Try to do as many family studies as you can and include that under morning time. I mean, it's just kind of a general term that we're going to do things together. There were some times that morning time was the bulk of our homeschool. We would maybe spend 2.5 hours, and that might include time running around outside. And it was just whatever we did, whatever subjects we would do together. And we would always end with like a fun read aloud. And again, if the weather was nice out, we'd go outside. I still do that with my 16-year-old up until probably maybe the end of October or so. Then I was like, okay, it's getting a little bit cold. It's a little windy out here. The pages are flying, everything. But if we can get outside to do some of that reading and some of those lessons. So when we have just so many different resources. Try to just figure out where can you combine it. And to think, so let's go back to that first grader, third grader, and fifth grader that I mentioned. Maybe just pick something sort of in the middle, or you can pick the fifth grader science and go through that. The first grader is going to hear little bits of things and they can draw a picture maybe if they want to. The third grader is going to hear a little bit more and you can ask them questions. The fifth grader is going to pick up on even more than that. Doesn't mean that any of them got any less science in. It just means that they just kind of picked up on what was appropriate for their level. And I have found that when you have all of these resources and all of this curriculum and all these books out and they're staring at you from the bookshelf, you start to feel like I'm guilty of not using those. I highly recommend don't get rid of them unless you think like this is not going to work for my family. But box them up and put them away somewhere. Put them in a closet, put them somewhere that will just out of sight, out of mind, and just have out the resources that are manageable right now. Because there are seasons where it is harder, especially for families you have a newborn and so or a toddler who's running around doing all kinds of stuff. And so that is going to be a different season. And the season, like you and I were saying, won't last forever. But I just recommend just kind of with that, when you have so many, I do have one friend and she's like, look, she's showing me all this stuff. And I was like, girl, it's wonderful. Put it away. You've already shown me what you're going to do this year. And that is plenty. And it doesn't mean that you wasted that money at all, because when you go to shop for your next homeschool year, just take a look in those boxes first before you go and purchase anything new.
Yeah. Shop your boxes first. So, how do you approach flexibility in your homeschool schedule? Because life doesn't go according to plan, and you could still plan on like a Sunday what you think the week is going to be, but then you wake up that day and, life happens. How do you approach that? Trying to be still flexible, still getting stuff done, still being productive, but handling those disruptions.
I think it goes back to that first question that you had asked me about what's the number one thing is just our expectations to understand that there's going to be interruptions. There's going to be times that we're going to have to disciple and possibly discipline our children because it's maybe somebody's gone off the rails or something, or there's a concern, there's a character trait that needs to be kind of poured in a little bit too. Or there's going to be times where maybe your mother-in-law calls. I remember having some seasons where my in-laws were not in good health and I was the one that was available because I wasn't working. And so I would pack the kids up and we would, drive over and help out with what they needed. And it was really just, I think that the mindset of it, because we think like, oh, I didn't get to the math lesson. There's surely going to be a failure in life now because my 7-year-old missed a couple of days of math lessons. And there would be times like, bring the math book with you. We're just going to do some stuff while we drive around to these doctor's appointments or something like that. So it just is, I think it comes down to our mindset and just being flexible with that and knowing that it is going to be okay. And I think that that comes from time, just seeing that your kids are making strides. It might be just a little bit. Some seasons we see just like it's like a slug barely kind of moving, but you're seeing some progress. And then there's going to be other seasons where they're just going to take off. And so I think that just keeping that also just all in mind, but also taking a look at what are your expectations? How do you view education? What is education for your family? Is it just modeling what the school is doing? Because that's very easy for them. So, say for the school, a teacher is sick, well, they just have a substitute come in and then they carry through with the plans. Like everything still happens. Whereas for us, if mom's not feeling well, I mean, that's a time we all have to be really flexible. There's somebody that's maybe a child's not feeling well. And I remember there being times where be one kid sick, and the next week another kid sick. And so that takes a lot of time too. And you're trying to keep them comfortable and keeping them, what do you feel like eating? Maybe some saltines, let me make you some tea. But just knowing that you can have plans, but just holding them loosely is
Mhm.
what I would say. And knowing that it's great to have all the chores done, but if all of the chores and everything done is at the sake of relationships and your patience and your anger level, then it's probably not going to be worth it then.
Yeah. You shared a lot of actionable strategies, but if parents want just a simple way to start, what do you think is the best thing to take action on that you've mentioned today? What should they start with this week, tomorrow, today? Like, what's the easiest way to like make a little change?
As far as homeschooling, or
Yeah,
you
as
think
far as
overall?
planning and all this stuff that we were talking about today, like if they're like, "Yep, I need to be planning better, I need to be executing better," like what should the first little change be?
Yeah, I think I would just go back to that morning and that evening routine is just having that figured out. I think when you wake up, I know when I wake up in the morning and I've done the things that were on my list, I'm like, okay, I'm ready just to get started in this day. And I have my morning routine. Sometimes, I've maybe had not a good night's sleep or something like that. Just knowing like, okay, Lisa, I just kind of have to just carry through and to do those things that are just on my list. And so I think that just having that figured out, what you want to do in the evening, in the morning, really will help out. And when it comes to the homeschooling, I know there's just, again, we'll go back to like the morning time. I can't sing the praises of that time
Mhm.
enough because I think it's just really valuable. It also was really good for my kids and their relationships with one another. And I think we need to really focus on that as a priority too, is relationships between our children with each other and relationships of ourselves as parents with our children as well.
I think you're right. Morning time is such a great way to simplify things. When parents are feeling overwhelmed, you just throw in a morning time and get so much done together. And then you feel really awesome because you got so much done and you've only spent an hour or whatever, and you're like, wow, we checked so much off the list. I agree with you there so much. So where can people find you online? Tell us also like about your podcast.
Yes, you can find me online. My website's just littlebylittlehomeschool.com, but I do have a podcast and you can find it on any podcast app. So whatever you're listening to Abby here on, you can find me at Little by Little Homeschool. And yeah, the hub of everything else is on the website. In the show notes of any podcast
Mhm.
episode are all links for different things as well. But yeah,
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Abby, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun to be able to connect and talk to you.
It was awesome.